I do have it here. Good evening, everyone. Okay, the place where I work is really the Center for Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies. We are located at the regional headquarters, not necessarily Mona campus. And the regional headquarters is across the road from the Mona campus. And I also work at the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy. So I'm really here tonight representing the UII and representing St. Thomas because I'm well known here, you know. I'm an honorable son of this parish, so let's get straight to it. A people without knowledge of their past history and culture is like a tree without roots. So said the right excellent Marcus Messiah Garvey. Mistress of ceremonies, members of the head table, the Bogle family, members of the Paul Bogle Foundation, special guests, residents of St. Thomas, and friends of St. Thomas, good evening to you all. It gives me supreme pleasure to address you today as a son of the parish, birthed, raised, schooled, and cultured right here. I bring you greetings from the Center for Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies and eminent Professor Vereen Shepherd, the director of the center, where I work as an administrator, and the P.J. Patterson Institute of Africa Caribbean Advocacy, where I also work as a researcher, and by extension, the general university community, particularly the Department of History and Archaeology and the Department of Government, where many scholars have dedicated considerable time to investigating, researching, and publishing important works in uncovering the truths about the MORANT Day War of 1865. The latest work, Color for Color, Skin for Skin, Marching with the Ancestral Spirits into MORANT Bay or at War by Professor Clinton Hutton is a must read. A book I recommend for the entire St. Thomas. Today I want to speak to you about our glorious history. The history of St. Thomas, which in my view occupies a unique place in not only Jamaica's but that of the English-speaking Caribbean. Furthermore, it is my belief that no other parish can rival the contributions made by St. Thomas, particularly post-emancipation history leading up to self-government and so-called independence. St. Thomas is a leader place, a trendsetter place, a place of great history and culture. 157 years ago, after the MORANT Day War, the people of St. Thomas ought to be reminded of their history and the proud heritage of which we are the beneficiaries. 27 years after full emancipation, in 1838, the free black masses, the African Jamaicans, were living in impoverished, destitute, hungry, and naked conditions. Mass unemployment, mass illiteracy, mothers wept and children suffered. Freedom was very costly. The plantocracy had successfully oppressed the former enslaved peoples into situations much comparable to the days of enslavement, when they exercised ownership over beautiful African people as a form of protest against emancipation, for which they were compensated 20 million pounds sterling for the loss of their labor and ownership over the enslaved. It was in this parish, then St. Thomas in the east and St. David, now joined together, making St. Thomas were the most strident, progressive, articulate, and militant expressions of leadership in response to the conditions of the people were found among Paul Bogle and his brethren and the parliamentary representative in the assembly, George William Gordon, also a brethren of Paul Bogle. It was in this parish people organized themselves in groups, societies, and organizations in the most progressive modus operandi to challenge the racist colonial society of the time, where the idea prevailed that leadership could only be exercised by the white race, particularly white rich men. The societies based in St. Thomas were numerous. They included, but are not limited to, the Anti-Slavery Society in St. Thomas in the East, this being the only formal anti-slavery organization at the time in the island, where Paul Bogle, James McLaren, Samuel Clark, Moses Bogle, and others were integral members. In St. David, there was the Society of Friends, as well as the St. David's Liberal Recording and Election Association. The Working Men's Literary Society of St. David, founded by John Willis Menard, a missionary from the United States who settled in the East after falling in love and marrying a Jamaican woman. He was later deported to the US because of his association with Samuel Clark and leaders of the Mark Bay War, as well as for his political utterances that advocated for the development of the black suffering masses. The Native Baptist movement was its strongest in the East. Paul Bogle was one of its preachers, and George William Gordon established different Baptist stations all across the eastern belt of the island. The most militant of any group was the Paul Bogle movement, with James McLaren, Edward Bailey, John Edwards, William Bogle, Moses Bogle, Henry Klein, among others. Paul Bogle was the general. McLaren is secretary. Henry Klein, chairman of many meetings and an old enslaved man. It was among this group of men a deputation was formed that walked the long journey to Spanish Town to advocate for the betterment of the people, and was refused by the governor. It was these same brethren, among others, who knew that something had to be done, something more than just talking. In post-emancipation Jamaica, the militant, aggressive, organized, and direct opposition to colonial oppression was to be found in St. Thomas.